We start tonight with the Kangaroos. Are they rock bottom, Caro? A devastating hit yesterday when they've lost another game.
The melancholy mood around North Melbourne, it deepened yesterday.
I mean, this is a team that's won 12 games now in their 5th season, and there is still hard to see any light at the end of the tunnel.
It's just a horribly broken footy club, historically inept. And
unfortunately, the Kangaroos are not only hurting themselves, they're hurting the competition because they're skewing the results, aren't they, really? And
how did we get here? How did we get to a world where a once powerful force of the AFL has been reduced to irrelevance? We can absorb the opinions of David King, Adam Simpson, John Longmire in the modern day media, talking with disdain about the current group and the failures to succeed compared to their golden era. But the Kangaroos have been lodged in this treading of water for so long that a massive chunk of the AFL viewership doesn't even know what the golden era looked like.
Champions. The Kangas have won a 4th premiership. Well done, Dennis Pagan. You deserve everything you've got today, and so does your club.
The fact is, the late 90s were owned by North Melbourne. Under the leadership of Dennis Pagan and Wayne Carey, North Melbourne would make Final Four appearances in every single year from 1994 until 2000. Penultimate hurdle failures in 94 and 95 would be vindicated in 96 with the club's first flag in 20 years. The AFL centenary year marked with the only Golden Premiership Cup. Preliminary final loss in 97 and a heartbreaking grand final loss in 98 to the back-to-back Crows, but North weren't done. They would continue to show up year after year, and with a second flag in 99, they established themselves as an AFL dynasty. The spoils were bountiful, and the highs were magnificent. And since then, nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, since the turn of the century, they are one of only 2 teams that have failed to make a grand final. In a league that creates even competition between clubs better than any, North Melbourne are among a couple outliers in how terrible they've been. So, what happened? Two of the on-field reasons why North Melbourne was so good revolved around firstly their vice-captain Anthony Stevens, and secondly their captain and best player Wayne Carey. Unfortunately for them, Wayne Carey was not short of baggage. Prior to the 2002 season, Carey was caught having an extramarital affair with the wife of Anthony Stevens, and the effects of it sent shockwaves through the entire club. Social media has created a world where players' personal lives are on full display, and some of them lean into it. In turn, it's also created a 24-hour news cycle where player discretions are short-lived in the public eye. But in the early 2000s, we're talking about an era where this stuff was reserved for tabloid runs. And they went feral for this story. This scandal was massive.
As 7 News revealed exclusively this afternoon, the playing future of Wayne Carey is in doubt tonight.
It may well be over, Jim.
For one, Anthony Stevens had been a groomsman at Carey's own wedding, indicating how close these two were. And the mystery surrounding Carey's eventual exit from the club created such intrigue that it was impossible to miss. Unconfirmed reports of physical and verbal altercations between Carey and Stevens resulted in Carey missing multiple training sessions. And when it all came to a head, Carey's tenure at North was no longer plausible, and he was more or less pushed into resignation. The effect of this scandal was so big that he would miss the entire 2002 season. He didn't even belong to an AFL club. This was a massive deal, because for those uninitiated, without commenting on the character he was off the field, strictly as a player, Wayne Carey has a damn good case as the greatest AFL player of all time. And for the best player in the league to miss an entire season because he was unsigned is absolutely unheard of. Carey stated in 2022 that the affair was the biggest regret of his entire life.
Single biggest mistake I made in my football career. Obviously there was guilt, there was shame, there's toxic shame, and that lasted forever and a day. Yeah. I thought I could handle, as at the time I think it was 14 front pages of the Herald Sun, and it went on for months and months and months. Yeah. And things have happened in the last 10 years, and there's no reporting of it anymore and stuff. But the
effects of it have been felt as late as the 25th anniversary of the '96 Premiership, where players supposedly got into a verbal stoush about the issue. While this incident is just one moment on the timeline that leads us to where we are, it is seminal in the destruction of North Melbourne's most successful period in history. Despite being justifiable if we're talking in a footy context, the Kangaroos lost their best player and captain, a blow that's likely to leave any club in a significantly worse position.
Say big would probably be an understatement. It put our football club back 4 or 5 years, just not in terms of just Wayne leaving, but just everything. You know, Anthony Stevens became the captain. Did he need to be captain with everything going on? There was a big divide in the group because people were, this and that. We lost not only our best player, but our captain, probably one of the greatest players ever to play our game.
The cost of having players who toe the on-field and off-field line is sometimes deadly, and sub-clubs can manage it, while others cannot. If nothing else, however, when Wayne Carey joined the Crows in 2003, it did gift us with one of the most memorable games in modern history.
Have a look at this. Have a look at this. Have a look at this, boys. Got the free, got the goal. Come on.
Before we get out of the late 90s, it's important to mention one thing that plagued the North Melbourne Football Club and many others throughout the nationalisation of the competition, and that is a broader discussion around the marketability of AFL clubs. North Melbourne have forever been cursed with being a small market club. They own little to no geography of the city as far as fandom, competing with clubs like Carlton, Collingwood and Fitzroy for the northern suburbs. And although they entered the game relatively early, they spent the majority of their formative years in the VFL being absolutely terrible. And unfortunately, early success in the VFL had a massive correlation with becoming a big market club. By the time North got some success in the 70s, the seeds were sown. Even through the golden age of the late 90s, despite making the prelims 6 straight years, the Kangaroos, shockingly, still struggled for commercial relevance. In 1996, despite being a finals club, the Kangaroos were heavily involved in talks for a classic AFL merger to absorb Fitzroy, becoming North Fitzroy. It fell through and Fitzroy went to Brisbane. But North continued to struggle to find corporate relevance so much that they began to play home games in Sydney and literally dropped the name North Melbourne to become simply the Kangaroos, with the end goal of becoming essentially a second team in Sydney. This experiment did not work, with crowds averaging around 12,000 people. This standard has stretched to as recently as the last 2 years, when there were serious conversations amongst those in the know about abandoning a 19th licence and instead opting to send the struggling Roos to Tasmania. Norf have been categorised for years by their working class background and their direct hole in the middle of the Arden Street facility that pumps straight shin boner spirit through the vents. That's their whole MO. Historically, they've worked harder with less talent, grit and grind mentality that outstrips the flashier clubs. Obviously, the salary cap is in place to ensure that there's no discrepancy between player talent pools between clubs. But unfortunately, spending outside of the soft cap is pretty difficult to regulate. Facilities and staff numbers can be affected by the revenue generated by higher membership numbers. And then there's the issue of reduced membership and fan attraction, creating a less sustainable environment for keeping players who want to transfer to more attractive clubs where they can play in front of bigger crowds and become bigger personalities, which is becoming ever increasingly more important in the modern game. North Melbourne do not fall under that category. They have the lowest self-generated income in Victoria and the second lowest total income in the country, factoring in AFL handouts. We could go into the depth of TV time slots and where all these differences affect clubs on a micro scale, but it'll get pretty boring. The bottom line is this: bigger market clubs find it a lot easier to bounce back from periods of mediocrity than small market clubs. Which makes what Carlton and Essendon have done in the last 25 years even more impressive, but those are different videos.